All right, awesome. It's Phumlani M. Majosi. I am back on the Phumlani Majosi show. This week, as I told you, I am starting a new segment of my YouTube channel called econCHAT, where I'm going to talk to popular economists in South Africa, engage them on the current affairs on the economy. Where are we and what can we learn as a society? And joining me on this segment, the first one is the famous Dawie Roodt. He's a chief economist at Efficient Group. Dawie, wonderful to see you. How are you doing, sir? All good.
You are too kind. You are too kind. I'm fantastic. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good. You're one of my favorite economists because every time I hear you on radio, you are being quoted in the media, I know it's going to be something very controversial. And I'm going to like
No, no,
this.
no. No, it's not controversial. No, that's certainly not the case. I'm not trying to be controversial, but I certainly do speak my mind.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And that's what we need when it comes to our social economic policy. We need to
Yeah.
point things out and we must be honest. We must be honest. We must not fear our policymakers. It's a democracy anyway. It's what democracy
Of
is
course.
about. Yeah, it's about a
But
vibrant debate, right?
yeah, but I think if you make public comments and you make public statements and people listen to you, there is a responsibility also to don't say stupid things. Think a
Yeah.
little bit about it and make sure that you can add to the conversation. The
Mm.
same with you. Whenever I get the opportunity to listen to you, I listen to you because I think you think a little bit about things before you talk about that. And we're a society quite often that where people just say things without really thinking about that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
quite often what we do, yeah, and quite often what we do also, you like somebody because he's a popular political figure, for example, and whatever he says is the truth. You don't
Yeah,
think
you're gonna
about
go
that.
with
Think
it.
about even if you make a mistake, always think for yourself.
Yeah, yeah. Now let's talk about the economy. Dawie, I have been battling with this for a very, very long time, and maybe you can help me out here, right? Why is South Africa underperforming country? I mean, sub-Saharan Africa. We grow at less than 1% over the past in recent years. That has been the case. We are struggling to grow it at least 1%. Why are we
Why?
underperforming? Yeah, what's going on? Why are we growing at less than 1%? Or I mean, almost every year in recent years. What's going on?
You know what? The short answer is we've got a weak political leadership. But
Mm,
but I can narrow it down. I can narrow it down to three main ingredients that you need in order to grow an economy. And you don't need to have a degree in economics. You don't need a very complicated economic computer program. You don't even need to understand much about economics. There's only
mm,
really only three things that you need. And if you do this, I promise you, your economy will grow. Okay,
yeah.
what are those three things? Here they are. And it's important to let's just talk through each one of them because they're interconnected very, very closely. The
Mm,
first one is you must protect private property rights. And when
mm,
I talk about private property rights, I mean a very broad definition of private property rights. It means I've got the right for my stuff. This is my stuff. You're not allowed to take it because it's mine. But I also have a right over my life. I've got a right over my freedom of movement. I've got a right over my labor. So that all those things are my properties. And all
mm,
those things must be protected. And in fact, the primary function of the state is to protect my stuff and to protect me. So that is the first ingredient when you want to bake this cake called the economy. The second ingredient, you must have freedom of trade. You must have free trade. That means there must be no obstacles between you and I or any two economic agents for buying and selling whatever they want to. Okay. And the reason why that is so important is because there is no free lunch, but there is one free lunch, and that is free trade. Because the moment two individuals or two economic agents they trade with one another, both of them are better off after the transaction than before the transaction. So you've created out of nothing, literally, you've created value. You've
mm,
created a free lunch. But, And that's why the protection of private property rights is so important. You cannot trade something if you don't own it.
I see. Okay. Yeah.
So there, those are those two. Private property rights, very broad definition, no obstacles, and protection, and the same for free trade, no obstacle, encouragement, and protection of free trade. And the third one, you must have sound money. Now, sound money, basically, in simple terms, is low inflation. Now, inflation is a very bad thing. Well, let me start from a different point. Prices going up and down are very important. And prices must go up and down. Because as prices go up and down, it reflects the underlying supply and demand forces in the economy. And those prices going up and down tells you and I what to produce, what to consume, how much this, how much that. So prices are signals all the time.
Oh,
But
signal.
when you have all prices going up, then you cannot see the signals, and that's inflation. You cannot see the signals, and if you can't see the signals, you do not know what to produce or what to consume. Your allocation process in the economy is undermined. That's why you must have low inflation. So the increase in the petrol price is not inflation. If the petrol price goes up and the brandy price goes down, there's not necessarily going to be inflation, but it tells me that petrol has become dearer relative to brandy. So use less petrol and use more brandy in this example, as an example. Okay, so do those three things. You protect private property rights, you allow and protect free trade, and you have sound money, and I promise you, you have an economy that's going to grow. So test that against South Africa. Do we have the protection of private property rights? And remember, that is the primary function of the state. That's the reason why we have a state. That's the reason why we have a place called South Africa, because that the place called South Africa is there for one reason and one primary reason only, and that's to protect me. That's the reason the country exists. So do we have a state that protects private property right? Well, in fact, we have legislation that allows for the state to steal my stuff. The state to steal my stuff. Apart from that, if I walk in the streets, I'm going to get robbed. And it's a dangerous place. Or they're going to kill me. They're going to steal my life, for example. And we have very high levels of tax. That is nothing but theft, very high levels of taxes, and many other examples. So we do not protect private property rights in South Africa. Do we have free trade? And the answer is certainly not. Yeah, in many cases we do, but not in all cases. In fact, there are many examples where you are prevented from trading with one another because you do not have some license, or where there are some prices that are fixed, preventing you from buying higher or lower than a certain price. Look at minimum wages. That a minimum wage prevents free trade. It means because we have minimum wages, we cannot create free lunches. We cannot grow the economy. And the third one is, do we have sound money? Well, the Reserve Bank is doing a good job under very difficult circumstances, but we have relatively high inflation still in South Africa. Why is that so? And the reason is because all these administrative prices are prices that are determined by a committee somewhere or a formula somewhere or a minister somewhere, like the petrol price, like the price for electricity, like the prices, the municipality rates and taxes and all that. Those are all administrative prices. And those prices are going up at a rate faster than what underlying supply and demand forces suggest. So, and that forces the Reserve Bank to increase interest rates all the time. And slowing the economy down, smothering the economy with high interest rates, because they don't have a choice. We do not have sound money because we do not have a competitive macroeconomic environment. So we do not qualify. And that's the reason why the economy doesn't grow. We cannot bake a proper economic cake because the three most important ingredients are simply not there. So why is that so? And the reason why that is so is because we've got a government that is following the wrong ideology. And their ideology is an ideology where the state wants to own stuff, where the state doesn't protect private property rights, where the state wants to centralize things. So it's an ideology. It's a leftist ideology. You can call it socialism. You can call it developmental. They call one another comrade and that sort of nonsense. So it is a state that ideologically, the state is not fixed or fixated on protecting my stuff. The state or the government is fixated in centralizing things. So private property rights, because of that, the ideology is not right. If your ideology is not right, your policies are not going to be right. That's why we have policies like expropriation, why we have the NHI, why we have things like labor legislation minimum. Those are policies because it's the wrong policies because the ideology is wrong. And thirdly, on top of all of that, we've got a government that is exceptionally incompetent. The civil service is highly inefficient in South Africa. And not all of them, of course, but it's highly inefficient. And we have a government that's quite often corrupt. So you've got ideological issues, you've got policy issues, you've got efficiencies issues, and you've got corruption issues as well. So, my goodness, how on earth can it's actually a wonder that this economy is growing at all.
Now, some argue, at least they've argued to me, Dawie, they've said, look, but China is a communist state that controls everything, and they've been growing at a staggering rate over the past 35 years, right? So they will say, look, communism, statism, socialism works, and therefore we should have more of it in South Africa. How do you respond to that?
Let's have a look. Okay, let's look at that. So what's been happening to the Chinese economy from, when was it, 1959? I think that was the end of the Chinese revolution, the Chinese civil war. I think it was 1950. From 1959 until 1976. Nothing happened in the Chinese economy. In 1976, I think it was, Deng Xiaoping opened up the economy and he used these words. He said, it doesn't matter whether the cat is white or black as long as it catches the mouse. That's what he said. And from that moment, Deng Xiaoping started opening up the economy and he allowed for private property rights and the protection thereof. And he allowed for things like, for example, free trade. And he allowed for prices to fluctuate. And from then onwards, the economy simply exploded, the Chinese economy. The opposite is happening right now in China. And the opposite is happening because they are reversing. Xi Jinping is reversing all those policies that opened up the economy. He's doing exactly the opposite. And that's why the Chinese economy is slowing down now. So that's the reason for the success in China. They have a capitalist or a free market system. And when it comes to the economy, they've got a communist system when it comes to politics.
And then the subject of freedom of trade, which you were saying we do need that. It's part of your three components or the ingredients, as you called them. Some people, look, they say, well, you want us to have just free trade. What about the free, cheap goods that are going to come from China at a very low prices, and they're going to flood our markets and kill our industries? So how do we get into free trade if we are going to allow for that? Isn't that going to kill our industries? Shouldn't we put some protectionism or protect our industries?
You know what? My neighbors, they go and buy groceries every Friday afternoon. And what my neighbors do, they go and buy groceries and they also buy my groceries and they just put it over the fence. So they dump their groceries in my house. So that means I don't need to work because they just give it to me. So that's an extreme form of dumping. Okay. And that is exactly what happens when another country subsidizes stuff and export it to you, because then your consumers, if China subsidizes something and come and dump it in South Africa, then we, South Africans, get the benefit. We, the consumers, get the benefit from that. So what I say, please come and dump as much as you possibly can, because then I get stuff for what's much cheaper. But the answer that you are looking for is that, yes, that is true. If somebody come and dump, because of whatever reason, stuff cheaper in South Africa, we, the consumers, will get the benefit from that. And that is true indeed, that our producers in that specific industry will be affected. But that's the nature of life. You have to adapt and you must become more productive so that you yourself can start manufacturing stuff as cheap as the Chinese so that you yourself can also provide the South African consumer good and quality and cheap stuff. And we do not have to rely on the Chinese to get cheap stuff to consume in the country.
So your answer is that we should not pursue protectionism of any form, right?
Certainly
The
not. What we
objective
should
must be
pursue,
to be more productive. We must be more
what we
yeah.
must pursue is to have better skills and to improve our productivity. And remember, in order to do that, you need all sort of stuff. You need at least electricity at a fair price. You need at least a safe environment where you don't have to spend a lot of money on security, for example. You have to know that if you want to go to one of the state departments, that you will be assisted by a friendly civil servant that's going to be effective and efficient. You want to go to a school where you know you're going to get world-class skills development. We cannot compete with the Chinese if we don't have world-class skills development, if we have this quality education that we have in South Africa. South Africa's quality of education is not only bad, it is of the worst in the world. How on earth can we compete with the Chinese? We can't. Fix that.
Yeah.
Don't protect him. Do not go and protect inefficient, unproductive people. Why on earth would you want to do that? Because your consumer is going to pay the price.
Yeah. Very interesting. I mean, we are looking at it from a consumer perspective, and people ignore that.
It's always. You always look at it from the consumer's perspective, never from the producer, the consumer. What is good for the consumer?
What is
it's
good for
the
the
question.
consumer? Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, okay, so now, Dawie, there's a new government of national unity. You've just painted a picture of why we are not growing. On May 29, the ANC lost its majority. They now have to govern, or they are governing in this new government of national unity. Can we go beyond 1%? Can we reach at least 3% economic growth between now and 2029? How do you see things?
The answer is yes, we will have a coalition government. It's a coalition, by the way. So yes, we have this new coalition government. Is this new? Well, we still have the same dominant political party, still the ANC. The ideology is still the same. The policies are broadly still the same. Some changes here and there on the periphery, but very little. So you do something, and you've been doing something for the last couple of years, decades, in fact, and you always had the same outcome. So now you're going to continue doing the same thing, and now we're going to get a different outcome. I doubt that. No, we're not going to see 3% economic growth. No, what we need to do, we have to get a government with a different ideology, and of course, a government with different policies. So I'm afraid, no, we're not going to see 3% economic growth. What I do think, I think the reality is that the financial markets, there was the side, it's the relief rally, because it was not a coalition to the left with MK or whatever. That could have been much worse. So the financial markets are much better off today. We've got a few ministers, a couple of new brooms, and they are new brooms cleans a little bit better. So the better financial markets will spill over to the economy. There's a sentiment improvement. Efficiency of the state will also contribute to economic growth. But overall, it will be on the margin. We're talking perhaps 1.5% growth that we can get to. We need much, much higher. We're not going to get that. In fact, it will remain below population growth. So no, 3% economic growth. Why will it suddenly be 3% when we've been trying the same sort of stuff for many, many decades and we always got the same outcome? Why are we going to do exactly the same and get a different outcome now? Unlikely.
Yeah. And what do you say about the COSATUs of the world? COSATU, SAFTU is led by Zweli Mavavi. Yeah, Zweli Mavavi. They are saying that the reason we are stuck here, where we are, is because the government is not doing more, right? The government is not doing more for the economy.
Yeah.
How to respond to that? To these people on the left who say government must do more in order to fix the unemployment crisis and other issues we face?
Yeah, well, of course, government must do more, but they must do the right things.
Or the right things more,
right.
not the wrong things more.
Yeah, stop doing the wrong things. Yes, well, but if you talk to, well, obviously, if you talk to the trade union organizations like COSATU and SAFTU, they are organizations that, in the first instance, represent the workers in the country. And I've just seen that COSATU is demanding a minimum wage increase of CPI plus 3%. So their workers that still got their jobs will be smiling because they will be getting 3% above inflation. In the meantime, we've got more than 10 million people in South Africa without a job, and if we give those COSATU members CP or a minimum wage of CPI plus 3%, then that 10 million people is probably going to become 11 million people.
Yeah.
So remember, they're talking not for the unemployed, they talk for the employed.
Yes.
And on top of that, there are many COSATU members that are civil servants. Civil servants in South Africa, not all of them, but as a rule, civil servants are hugely overpaid and hugely unworked. They are exceptionally inefficient in South Africa. Again, not all of them. And the state's finances is so deep in trouble that if we keep on paying the civil servants like we have the last couple of how many years more than inflation, then we are going to get into very, very deep financial trouble. And we are heading for a financial crisis in South Africa. The state owes too much money. We cannot afford it. Please, COSATU, as they say, read my lips, we do not, the money is finished and klar. There isn't money to do this. If we do this, we're going to get into trouble. And that's why we are in trouble already because of excessive wage increase. In fact, let me rephrase that. I want to pay our civil servants much, much more, much more. But, and this is very important, but they must be dramatically more efficient and productive and helpful and supportive of the economy, and not what we've had the last couple of how many decades. So I'm afraid, COSATU, you are actually part of the problem. You're not part of the solution.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I was looking down here because I'm looking for another post I made on Facebook, not just this past month in September. There is one of South Africa's labor unions. I'm gonna confirm the name soon. They are saying that, well, they want a 15,000 rand national minimum wage. That was according to the Business Day report. 15,000 rands national minimum wage. That's what they're looking for.
You know, can
Can
I
you
tell you
believe
what the
that?
actual minimum wage is? Do you know what the actual minimum wage in South Africa is? Do you know
What
what it
is it?
is?
What is it?
It's zero. It is zero.
Mm.
The minimum wage in South Africa is zero because if you don't have a job, you get zero. That's the minimum wage. And the more we push for so-called minimum wage, the more people will be forced to go into the actual minimum wage, the zero minimum wage.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which is what
And
is
that's
worse.
such a shame. I mean, think about somebody that's prepared to sell his labor because he needs food. He needs to put food on the table for his family, and he's prevented from doing that because it is illegal to sell my own labor. Imagine that. That
Yeah,
must be madness.
yeah. But what about Dawie? There are people who say then if you remove the national minimum wage, you are opening up for exploitation of people. People will be paid
You
slave
know,
wages.
yeah,
How do
yeah,
you
yeah. You know,
respond to
that's
that long? Yeah, it's an old argument.
when I was a young man, I studied communism because
Mm.
I'm interested in all these funny ideologies. And I studied communism, and I read a quote one day. I can't remember who said that. But the quote said, in capitalism, man exploits man. In communism, it is the other way around.
Yeah.
So, yes. If we remove the national minimum wage, certainly a lot of people's salaries will fall, without a doubt. The
Mm.
input cost on manufacturing in South Africa will come lower in making South Africa more productive. It means that we will grow the economy faster. It means that we will start employing more and more people. And it means unemployment will come down as well. I don't believe in this word exploitation. Explain to me what exploitation means. Am I, Dawie, being exploited by my employer? Because my employer expects for me to work literally 24 hours a day. My boss can call me anytime and he asks me to do A, B, and C. And you know what? I do that.
Mm.
And I've been doing it for 22 years when we started this business 22 years ago. And I do that, and that's why we have a successful economy today. Am I being exploited? Well, in fact, I am very happy if my boss calls me after hours because, and I never take a lunch break unless there's some specific reason for that or whatever the case might be. Let me give you, I've got the cure. I've got the cure for the common cold. I've got the
Mm.
cure for the common cold. The weirdest thing is, the moment you become an entrepreneur, you don't get the common cold anymore.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. That
Yeah,
is the
yeah.
difference. If you entrepreneur and it depends on your hard work to make it, and in a way, if you sell your labor, you are also an entrepreneur. You're also an entrepreneur. Go
Mm.
and look at the differences between people that are entrepreneurs, how many days they take off leave, and people that are just normal civil servants, for example, how many days they take off leave. And it's weird. The entrepreneurs, that's a cure for the common cold.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Entrepreneurship.
yeah, yeah. Entrepreneurship. And then public debt. I mean, is it something we should be concerned about? We are just about
Oh, very
70.
much.
Yeah, I mean,
Very much.
how do you see? Yeah.
It's not only our public debt that is the main problem, it's the rate at which it's changing. So our
Mm,
public debt at the moment is about 75% of GDP. But to that, you have to add the local authorities because the local authorities are, many of them are financially just not viable anymore. They are
mm,
collapsing, our local authorities. You have to add that debt because the Minister of Finance will eventually have to bail them out as well. You have to add the debt of the state-owned enterprises, Eskom, for example, Transnet, the post office. The post office is gone. It's finished. It's dying. And all those other state-owned, you have to add all that debt. Now we're talking about a couple of 100 billion extra. And if you add all of that up, then the actual debt to GDP ratio is probably closer to about 90% of GDP. And every year it goes up by 2-3% relative to GDP. And that debt needs to be funded. Somebody needs to lend the money to the state. And the people that lend the money to the state, one day they're going to get up and say, listen, but you owe too much money. You won't be able to repay me. I don't want to fund your fiscal deficits anymore. And that's the financial crisis I'm talking about. That day will come if we continue on this trajectory.
yeah. So, but what do we then do about the state-owned enterprises? How do you see them in this new government of national unity? Will there be a change of how
Well,
they are handled and the reform there?
well, I guess over time I became a bit of a softie. I mean, my
Yeah.
answer would have been, yeah, 10 years ago, my answer would have been to completely privatize it. And I guess that is still my answer, to completely privatize it. But there are alternatives to full privatization. What is actually happening today, we are privatizing them anyway.
Mm,
Eskom is being privatized. The private sector is just generating their own electricity. But I think what we need to do, and it's happening in many cases, I can say, very glad to see. Transnet is a good one. Michelle, what's her name? Michelle Phillips, the new CEO there. She's actively trying to get private sector participation. So you don't necessarily have to privatize it, but you can certainly dish out some concessions. Get the private sector to run that rail, that line, or get the private sector to do this and that. But it's happening already. You have to get private sector participation, and you must privatize completely in many cases. South African Airways is a very good example. I mean, that thing should have been privatized years ago. But I guess there could be reasons why we want to keep the railroads, because we want to transport people from rural areas into the cities. So I'm not trying to be um, like I used to be, but privatization is certainly my first option. But at least you have to get significant private sector participation, and concessions is an alternative to that, as an example.
I'm speaking to Dawie Roodt. He is a chief economist at Efficient Group, one of the very outspoken economists who is not afraid to tell what he thinks about South Africa's economy. Remember to subscribe to this YouTube channel and to get my book, Lessons from Past Heroes. It's available in all bookstores across South Africa. I do have signed copies at Exclusive Books, Creston Mall. I passed by recently and signed copies there. So do check my book, Lessons from Past Heroes. Dawie, minimum wages, people are going to say to you, well, in Europe, there are minimum wages there, minimum wage laws, and
Yes.
their unemployment rates are lower. How do you respond to that?
Yes. And Europe, you can also argue that Europe is more socialist than South Africa because the state spends more money relative to the economy than in South Africa, as an example. Yes, those are all arguments. My argument against that is that socialism is extremely expensive. It's extremely expensive.
So
And
they can
maybe you can
afford to
one
pay
day,
for it. Yeah.
somebody's need to pay for that. And before you move into a socialist system, I guess, first become wealthy. And then you do that if you really want to. But if you look at the real if you call European socialist countries, many of them, the state plays a big role in the economy, but what they do, they've got high levels of taxes, but this money is spent on the private sector, and the private sector is providing many of these services. So it is, although the state although taxes are relatively high, this money is actually transferred to the private sector to provide the goods and services to the economy. That is not real socialism. Real socialism is where the state owns the factors of production. And in Europe,
Yes.
the state doesn't own the factors of production. The taxes could be high, but the factors of production are in the hands of the private sector. Minimum wages, I would argue that the minimum wages probably in many cases would have been where they are set now, or maybe even higher, even if there was no minimum wage legislation in Europe. Because what happens, if the tide comes in, all boats are lifted. And what happened in Europe, Europe is a very much more equal society. Poor countries like African countries are very much unequal societies. And that's another example of economic growth. The moment your economy starts growing, inequality goes down, unemployment goes down, and wages go up. And if the wages grow up and you put in minimum wages below the normal minimum wage set by the market, you can set minimum wages wherever you want to, because the market, the actual wages is actually higher than the minimum wages. So the answer to that is economic growth, wealth creation actually resulted in a reduction in unemployment, a reduction in inequality, reduction in poverty, and all those sort of things. So first become wealthy, and the best way to become wealthy is to follow a market economy. And those three ingredients that what I've mentioned earlier.
Well, I mean, that's a very important point, because I mean, I've said this to people before, and that is those guys, for example, the Nordic countries or Scandinavian countries, they can afford their massive welfare state because they don't have our issues of high unemployment rates. They have a good tax population to tax together to be able to afford all of that. We can't, it's expensive. It's a very expensive, system they are running there.
Yeah.
And you've got to be rich.
But let's turn Kusato's argument around. So they want the minimum wage of 15,000 rand. Why 15,000? Let's make it 50.
Or a million.
Yeah, whatever. Why settle for small change? Go for the big numbers. So even Kusato agrees that there must be some sort of level where it's becoming damaging to the economy. We can debate where's that level, I guess. But it is damaging to the economy. But where? In fact, before the minimum wages were set in first time, a number of universities did some research and made some calculations of what they think is going to happen to unemployment with the setting of the. And everybody agreed. Everybody, even some leftish economists, agreed that if you start with the minimum wage in the economy, unemployment will increase. Everybody agreed with that. They disagreed with the magnitude, of course, by how much it will go. But what we have seen in recent years, we've seen a dramatic increase in unemployment in South Africa. So you can't get away from that. Is that I'm pretty sure that the minimum wage added to the unemployment in South Africa. But of course, the most important reason for the high levels of unemployment is weak economic growth.
Yeah. Well, obviously, all it means is that when you decide what minimum wage you want, you are just deciding how many people to, get out of jobs or to deny jobs opportunities, right? If you set it very high, yeah.
You cannot create free lunches because you are prevented from trading. You can't create a free lunch.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
It's simple as that. So are you optimistic or pessimistic about our future at this point? How do you see South Africa?
I think, well, like I've said, I think the main issue in South Africa is political. We need to fix the ideology of our political leadership. And I think we are moving towards that. I think, I hope this national government will last the next 5 years, and I've got some doubts about that. But if they can last for the next 5 years, and there's another election, and the electorate, I think, gradually understands that if you want to become wealthy, you need a market economy. And I've got a sense.
Sorry, who understands that?
That
Can you repeat that?
the electorate, the
or the
people that
electorate.
voting, the
Mm.
voter. So, and I think what we're going to see, and we're probably going to see it in the next election, is a formation of two political centers, basically, a left and a right center. And I've got a suspicion that the right center, the more market-orientated part, when I talk about right, I'm not talking extreme stuff, but the more market-orientated guys will probably prevail. And for that to happen, I think the ANC is certainly going to, they've split a number of times already. But the ANC is something that cannot last in its current format because you've got people like Cyril Ramaphosa there, you've got Lamola there, which I think is a good guy, but at the same time, you've got people like Paul Masitile there and Panyaza Lesufi, and you've got guys like Fikile Mbalula that hasn't got a clue how the economy works. So you know, I think the internal tension in the ANC is such that the ANC is really going to split. You know, I know, for example, you know this as well, that the Communist Party is not happy with the ANC getting in bed with the DA, obviously for ideological reasons. The same goes for Kusatu. They're not happy with that. So the internal tension within the ANC is such that I can't see the ANC in its current format, in its current size, surviving much more than another 5 years, which is a
Dawie
good
Roodt.
thing. Which is a good thing.
Which is a good thing. I like that.
Yeah.
Dawie Roodt, great to talk to you, sir. Remember, it's Phumlani M. Majozi. This is the Phumlani Majozi show. I'm on X at Phumlani M Majozi. I'm on Facebook, Phumlani M Majozi. I'm on LinkedIn, Phumlani M Majozi. I'm on Instagram, at Phumlani M Majozi. Where am I? TikTok, at Phumlani M Majozi. We'll chat soon.